I'm Michael Lee. I am creativity and innovation mindset specialist. I work with companies to help them improve their creativity, innovation, and adaptability. And I have a radio slot once a month talking about it. And I have an article once a month column in the Mail and Guardian talking about it, just to point out that creativity is a very important thing. With me today is Alex Pryor. Alex, you want to introduce yourself? She's the one waving.
Hi there, everyone. Yes, I'm Alex Pryor. I'm head of innovation and ventures for EOH, which is one of Africa's largest IT companies. I'm also a globally recognized speaker, specifically on emerging technology, of which AI is one. And I've recently launched my book, which is Risking Irrelevance, Why Businesses Can't Afford to Ignore Web3. And what the heck is Web3 anyway?
And of course, the inevitable and I guess what's the word? Omnipotent Greg Sarandos, who will tell you about himself and about the African Academy of Artificial Intelligence. Greg, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Sarandos. I'm the co-founder of the African Academy of Artificial Intelligence. Our job is mainly to make missions to make AI approachable, accessible, actionable, and impactful. That's why we do quite a few of these free webinars to help people along their AI journey. We found that there's several. So skip over that. Just go to the next slide, please. And this is like to lay the backdrop of how we kind of open some of our master classes. Like, there's a lot of concern and a lot of fear about artificial intelligence, about where it's taking us, or where we are taking it. And I put out this poll that says, no, mass job losses, machines take over, privacy issues and intellectual property rights, expanding the digital divide, will get worse, will get better. If it gets better, will it get better enough? Ethical concerns and bias. And a lot of the fear comes from, is AI coming for me and my company? And that's where a lot of the uncertainty. But with that backdrop, where AI and innovation and creativity intersect is a huge question going into the next year and a half. It's how do we interact? It will, throughout human history, all ideas have come from human beings, and I think a lot of what we'll learn from Michael and Alex today is that the case, or do we still need humans to come up with the ideas? So from that, I'll pass it back to Michael.
Thank you, Greg.
Yep.
What we're going to do today is talk about creativity. The first, for the African Academy of Artificial Intelligence, first of these many webinars focused specifically on creativity, innovation, and adaptability. And as I said, that's what I do. I do creativity mindset thinking. And so it's very interesting to me, and I'm doing some pieces for Mail and Guardian on AI and creativity, because it's a very interesting question to me personally. First of all, around how creativity is impacted by AI. We all know that we can use AI to help us be more creative, right? We can use ChatGPT to help us get some research items for our, for our work that we're doing. In fact, I'm going to ask myself and both myself and Alex are going to do a little brief presentation. Then we're going to get into some details about the question of, is AI actually creative or not, right? And one of the important things to realize is that when you talk about creativity, some people think of art, yeah? They think of paintings and stuff. It's not always about art. Creativity applies to all types of things. What we have to think about in a new way. That's it. So in business, creativity is considered the number one most important skill for the future of work, more important than any other skill. For innovation, obviously, creativity is essential. You can't innovate without new ideas. Even if they're only a slight change, they have to be different than they were, or you're not innovating. So creativity is considered by LinkedIn, by the World Economic Forum, by Forbes magazine, by IBM, and many other sources as the most important skill there is in business. Therefore, it's kind of important to think about how ChatGPT impacts on it. What we're going to do today is not give you any real answers, right? But actually ask the questions and help you to also participate in the conversation. So we want you to actually participate in the conversation. So I'm sure everybody here knows how to raise your hand on Zoom. It'd be great if you have anything to say at any time, please raise your hand, the electronic hand preferably, and we will actually get you to that, or the physical one, and we'll actually, I'd love to hear from you as well on some of these points that we are I'm going to be touching on today. So, Alex, would you like to say a few minutes of stuff about the basic question of AI and creativity?
Yeah, for sure. So, my focus is always on emerging technology, and that it helps. It's just kind of useful to frame that. Emerging technology has nothing to do about when the technology was invented. I mean, AI has been around since the 1950s. But what it does have to do is adoption rates. So where emerging technology sits is probably in about the first 30-odd% of general market adoption. And that's what we're really seeing, and what the big trend is obviously generative AI. And that's predominantly what we're going to be chatting about today. We're not going to be talking so much about machine learning models. We're not going to be talking about financial algorithms. We're specifically looking at what generative AI can do. And so I am going to be coming in more from the tech side to kind of balance Michael's very creative side. So pretty much for every question he asks me, the answer is going to be, well, it depends. But basically, at the end of the day, generative AI, like ChatGPT, is a tool. It's going to help you, but it is ultimately what you put in is what you're going to get out of it, much like any type of work. And that goes the same for your video and your image creation generative AIs. So that is my brief overview of where I am. And Michael, happy to hop into it now.
Fantastic. You know, I actually have designed a very beautiful opening statement, right? Beginning with the idea that basically the debate is not settled. The relationship between AI and creativity presents a complex and multifaceted narrative, right? It's a question we have to ask around it is, you know, is it truly generating creative ideas that are novel, valuable, and so on? Or is its scope limited to mimicking patterns and optimizing solutions based on pre-existing data? Right?
Michael,
that's really the question.
Your slides haven't moved forward, eh?
Then they shouldn't yet. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. Just check.
We're going to get to that just now, that one. But so I was asking those questions, and in fact, these slides should just be off while I do this part. So thank you. So, you know, traditionally, any human endeavor, right? Creativity, like all human endeavors, involves new ideas or products that are both new and valuable. And this notion of creativity extends beyond novelty. It includes emotional depth, contextual awareness, intentionality, and lots of different elements, right? And so the answer might depend, actually, as Alex just said, the answer is maybe yes, maybe no, right? It depends. And the depending is, first of all, the question of how we define creativity at all, right? How do we actually define it? What do we mean when we say creativity? And so what I thought we would do after we finish this opening question I just asked, which was actually written, of course, by ChatGPT, right, and not by me. So I actually had to chat write that this morning. But what I decided we should do is actually look at some definitions of creativity and ask ourselves, if this is what creativity is, does generative AI actually meet that requirement, right? So go back to the slides, and you can see them now, yes?
Yep.
This is one of the primary definitions. This one is attributed to Sir Ken Robinson, but it's actually very similar to a definition that's probably the most used definition of creativity in some form, which is that it's original ideas that have value. Now, this brings us to the question not only of besides what the value is, but what is original. So, Alex, does generative AI create original ideas?
So again, the answer is going to be it depends. And yeah, of course. No, the simple answer is actually yes. AI can create original ideas. Does it do it on purpose is a more relevant question there. So AI can come up with something that has never been seen before. AI can come up with an idea that has never been held before. And that idea may have a lot of value to a lot of people. But did it do it on purpose? Did it deliberately try to do it, or did it just randomly throw things out because of the algorithm it was trained on? So yes, you know, in that perspective, it can come up with a new idea and it can add value. I see you've got making connections between old ideas. AI can absolutely do that. So if we're limiting our definition to these two, then so far AI is creative.
Great. And by the way, we have a couple of practitioners, at least, of AI in the audience here with us. So if you have anything specific to your work that you want to interrupt us, please feel free. Do not feel shy. This is not a presentation. This is an experience. So anytime you want to start from now on, anybody wants to raise your hand, say anything, even if you're afraid it's not clear, but please try to use your electronic pen if possible, just because I'm stupid and can't always see everything. So, next quote. It's going to get a little bit more complicated. Octavia Butler says it's persistence through uncertainty. Now, this seems to be something that AI is really good at, because uncertainty is the number one fear of human beings. We are more afraid of uncertainty than any other thing, right? And I mean, we will do crazy things to avoid uncertainty. There's studies done on this over and over again. There is a study done to show that people are more afraid of people are more stressed by being afraid of losing their job than when they lose their job. It's less stressful to lose your job than to worry about it, right? Which makes no sense, right? It's less stressful for
when the worst has happened. You're not worried about it. You can move forward.
Right. We're much more stressed by worrying about the worst than the worst actually happening. Even worse than that, women with breast cancer were found to be more stressed waiting for the results than when they got the results that said they had breast cancer. And this happens again and again in various studies, right? So if creativity involves persistence through uncertainty, and it's difficult for us to persist through uncertainty, then certainly AI must be very good at this compared to humans. Huh?
You see, I disagree here, because AI just doesn't feel uncertainty. You can prompt it to imitate an answer given under a condition of uncertainty, but in and of itself, AI doesn't feel. So it can't be uncertain, therefore it can't persist through it. It can certainly help you persist through the uncertainty, give you ideas of what to do about that, write your CV for you if you think you're going to lose your job. But yeah, I maintain AI doesn't understand fear, or it itself cannot feel fear. So I don't think this one hits.
Exactly, right. So the uncertainty in actual uncertain conditions, then AI doesn't care. Right?
Yeah, AI just knows that this is what you've given it, and now it's going to output based on those parameters. There is no uncertainty. There is no, I don't know if I should do this or I should do that. AI is just going to take what it's got, and it's going to process everything underneath the hood and spit something out on the other end.
Right, and what you've touched on is a beautiful thing. That's a half-an-hour talk that I actually do, which is about like that uncertainty doesn't exist at all. It only exists in our minds, right? So that's an interesting point, is that there is no such thing as uncertainty, and it's the greatest fear we have. We fear, the only thing we fear the most is what we create ourselves. So it's an interesting point. If AI requires persistence through uncertainty to be creative, what you're actually saying is it can't be creative according to this definition, because it can't persist through something it doesn't exist in the first place.
For certain, but this is also a very narrow definition.
It is indeed, but I mean, we can't just have the same one over and over again. That would be very uncreative.
For sure. Okay.
Breaking out of established patterns to look at things in a different way. If you don't know who Edward de Bono is, he's the most important thinker in creativity theory in history, right? So breaking out of established patterns to look at things in a different way. Now, certainly AI can't do that at all, right? They can only follow established patterns, right?
So I'm going to go yes and no. So breaking out of established patterns, it can actually. It can. So it depends what you put into a model, because a model can learn, a model can adapt. So actually, yes, and can evolve over time in terms of how it interprets things. So that's breaking out of established patterns. And looking at things in a different way, I'd say that's one of the most powerful things that generative AI can do for you, is to take the patterns that you've kind of put into it and you say, give me new insights on this. And it's going to be able to actually give you things you haven't thought about. Now, that's helping you look at things in a different way. It itself can't look at things in a different way just because these are just answers. It's not specifically comparing those answers to each other. It's just giving the answers or giving the output, giving the content. So while I think it can break established patterns, I don't think that it itself is looking at things in a different way unless you tell it to.
Okay, well, certainly the next one here. Sorry. This one here. Intelligence having fun. Before we get to that,
what we call an artificial general intelligence, so a self-aware intelligence. AI itself, we can't say is having fun, but we can have fun with AI.
Okay, well, let's go to Lucian on that note, and I think Lucian's one of those people helping us have fun with AI actually in his life. So, Lucian, go ahead.
So I'm just going to jump straight into it, but one of the most useful ways that I've used AI in the past was I was angry with a co-founder of mine in the past, and I simply wrote out my angry letter. I said, I'm angry. These are my angry points. Please help me reframe this so that I can have a constructive conversation with this. And like, it managed to basically therapy me through that conversation in a way that got both of us onto the same level of understanding. And that was just related to your point earlier on how AI can help you reframe your thinking.
Yeah, and that is actually kind of creative in terms of, because sanitizing one's own anger in the topic that you're in is actually one of the hardest things you can do, because you always sit there in the moment like, how can I rephrase this? How can I rephrase this? But that will objectively just rinse it out. And take a new approach. So that's a very great example.
I mean, like, it is structured in essence, right? It's like, okay, you extract facts and then you present the facts in such a way as to open up conversation. And it's well documented enough, so it makes sense as part of large language model. Anyway, that's just my point on that bit.
Yeah, the only caveat I would add with that is, and it's fine in your example where you've given it the input and said, reframe this. Just remember, one very important thing to remember about tools like ChatGPT in particular is, just like people, it's an incredibly good bullshitter. So while you can use it for any number of really cool things, do not use it for research, because it will lie to you. In that way, it's actually very creative. It just doesn't really, you don't realize it's being creative.
Yeah, exactly. Like, always check your facts with GPT.
Yeah. Also, don't chuck intellectual property into any of these things. You never know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, well, yeah. Who hasn't? Come on, let's be honest.
No, but I mean, it's an important point being raised, right? We know, most of us know there are ways to use AI to help us be more creative in what we're doing. And that example you're using, Lucian, is a good example of like, okay, I want to say a certain thing and I kind of know what I want to say, but give me some more options, right? I started using chat to like help me think of ideas for articles. Give me 20 ideas for this article about X, Y, and Z, and it'll give you 20 ideas, and maybe 19 of them are crap, but you know what? So are 19 of my own 20 ideas. And that's how creative thinking works. So usually when we're doing a company, in the past, doing company creative problem solving process, you want to generate 50 or 100 ideas to get to one good idea, right? Or one usable idea. So here's the ironic thing: if you get a room full of 20 or 30 people, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to get 100 ideas at most. ChatGPT, it speeds it up a little bit. But if you're working alone, it gives you a team, really, doesn't it? It gives you a team of people that are throwing out ideas. And you can even design and start programming the AI to actually come from a certain perspective or certain position. That's going to be very important where we're going, right? I didn't really frame for you where we're going here. So what we're going to look at is ways that were some quotes about what creativity is. Then we're going to look at some definitions of creativity that might favor AI and might favor the human. And then I'm going to show you the adaptability quotient and how that can help us determine if AI is adaptable or not. And that's where Alex's perspective may be very, very shining for us, because adaptability is really the new kind of thing we're measuring now, along with intelligence and emotional strength and so on. So we'll get to that in a minute. But this is, I think, a really important one here. Angela Davis says, the ability to imagine that which is not and bring it into being. Now, certainly, we know this. Creativity can be past-facing and future-facing, right? You can look back at things and you can use what you found from the past to create something new by mixing them together, for example, a very common thing to do creatively, right? But there's also a kind of future-facing creativity. And you can sort of distinguish between the two in some ways. When you talk about innovation, right, there's incremental innovation, which is tiny incremental improvements to a product or process that don't involve like a big major breakthrough, but just often come from testing and retesting and getting input and so on, right? Incremental innovation. And then there's the sort of more breakthrough innovation we call disruption, something where something completely shifts a landscape, completely shifts an industry or even reality in the world. That's more of a future-facing phenomenon, right? The kind of creativity that doesn't involve a lot of past-looking thinking. It obviously needs data from the past, but it involves a breakthrough which is inexplicable. We're going to get to a little bit of a discussion of that idea of an inexplicable breakthrough in the next section. But surely, Alex, this kind of creativity, the ability to imagine that which is not and bring it into being, that must be something that AI, generative AI, has no idea how to do, right?
And yet it does it. So it cannot imagine that which is not and bring it into being, but it can certainly bring into being that which is not. Just back to my previous point about how it's a very good bullshitter. I love this example, and unfortunately for the lawyer involved, there was a lawyer in New York, probably towards the beginning of the year, who he was going to court and he hadn't had time to get through everything, so he asked ChatGPT to give him case precedent, which it duly did. It, cited the case precedent, various where it could find it, who the complainants were, and then it went off to court, and it turned out that not a single one of those existed. Someone mentioned in academic research, there have been a number of cases much the same, where it cited these amazing sounding articles that never existed. Professors and researchers who are complete figment of its imagination. So I say of its imagination, it doesn't have imagination in the way we think about it. And even the answers it gives us, actually, it's not looking at the entire picture. From a tech perspective, all a large language model is doing, what ChatGPT is doing, is it is predicting the next most likely word in the output. Word, not a sentence, word, in the output that matches both what it's been trained on and the parameters you put in, which means that it might find something accurate, or it might just say, okay, I need to give a person's name, and the most common person's name in research is John, and that will be the most likely next word in that title. So yeah, I think it definitely brings into being that which is not, but it itself can't imagine it, although it can tell you when it has made things up.
I guess this is the part that gets confusing to me, right? No matter how much I've studied it, it's not making stuff up, but it's making stuff up. It's taking it from the past or finding stuff in the past, but most of what I create is based on the past experiences I've had. So somewhere in between that truly generative creativity where I'm making stuff up that doesn't reflect on the past, but is forward-looking, there's this thing, and I think it's around flow, and we're going to get to that, as I said. I think it's around flow and that state of inexplicable creativity that human beings can attain, right?
For sure.
And that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say what it does, and I'm looking for a box here, which I don't have a small enough one, but what it basically does, it takes everything and puts in a box, shake, and throw it out in a way that makes sense depending on what you've asked it to do. So yes, you're going to get new things because it can take those things and reimagine it in a million different ways, but it's not imagining it. It is just recombining the past. So as I said, it's not future facing. It is merely taking what it's got and putting that in ways that make sense according to how it's been programmed.
Lucian, you had your hand up a minute ago. Do you still want to say something?
Okay, yeah, sure. I actually want to give an example from the old days of 2016, AlphaGo. If you guys remember when the Holy Grail of AI was founded through defeating the game or cracking the code on the game Go, right? That huge black and white boards with the stones. There was the world's best player played against it. They played 5 games. He was having a tough time. I think in one of the last games, he actually played a deeply theoretical move. And AlphaGo gets very universal at the high levels. I don't understand it. But he nearly pushed over the machine. They actually thought it had tanked. It did provide an answer. So he got the opportunity to see the answer to his deep theory. He lost the game, but he came away from that game saying, I'm a better player because he just got trained. So that's what I call assisted intelligence.
And I have another point on the word prediction machine. Like when you're speaking in autopilot, are you not simply a word prediction machine? Like, have you never been on autopilot? Like somebody's speaking at you, but you're actually doing something else. And then suddenly you find yourself answering the person. And sometimes you're just not entirely accurate. And they're like, what? And you're like, what were we talking about? And then you realize, oh, I wasn't actually part of this conversation, really. I was just running on autopilot, predicting the next word to say. So
yeah,
there is
I absolutely agree with that. Sometimes you're sort of driving and you suddenly look around going, how did I get here? Much the same sort of thing. I think that this is just done in a bit more of a predictable way, but you need to understand what it's doing to get the best results.
Yeah, I mean, like predictability with large language models is sometimes one of the most difficult things to actually achieve, though.
Yeah, for sure. It's the black box problem. How did it actually get from A to B? How did it process that answer? And that's something that becomes quite problematic when you're using AI for, I don't know, so someone's mentioned the legal industry.
Yes. Got a very different clients at the moment that we're building for.
Cool.
I think the question that brings to mind for me is two things really. One is where every creative effort really ends up is in the toilet. When you're talking about art, 90% of words that get written in a book get rewritten. Ernest Hemingway very famously said that the first draft of everything is the beep, right? There is no idea by a creative person, including a company, right? Nobody here who's running a company or working in business expects their company to succeed the first time they put the product out. Suddenly, like, the world buys it and nothing's wrong. Like, even if it succeeds, there's problems, there's breakdowns, there's how many versions of iOS are there? How many iPhones have they had to remake just with slight tweaks? There's constant improvement, right? So, ChatGPT isn't going to spit out a perfect answer the first time either. The question is, and this is something we're about to get into now, the question is, where do you start to know the difference between how it tweaks something and how artificial intelligence makes decisions to do that? And I want to get into that thing I said we're going to get into, which is to look at this question. Creativity here's some ways that AI seems to win. AI seems more creative than humans. And this is just my guesses here. So I'm going to hear from the experts as well. Creativity is an algorithm. If you look at the bottom right of this screen, you'll see how creativity actually works. And I've got an 8-step version of this, but rather than confuse things a great deal, look at the basic thing here. Creativity happens like this. You take stuff in through your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your hands, or your brain in some way interprets information, right? Then you manipulate the information in different ways, compare it to other information and so on, and you come up with new ways of interpreting the information, new ways of thinking. That's conceive. Then you represent a new way of thinking, whether by speaking or doing something, painting something, or creating a business and putting it into the world. Whatever it is, that's how simple the creative process actually is, right? We mess it all up, and there's a whole lot of information to go into about how we mess it up as human beings by putting our filters on the perception and representation processes especially, which messes up our ability to freely have ideas, because our ideas are controlled by our personalities, right? So who we are is how we see. How we perceive the world is based on our identity, who we are, what we've become, right? Get what I'm saying? Yes? So the more that's tainted by that, the more that we are actually not going to have clearly the most open ideas. So the algorithm that we use to generate creative ideas is broken. It's broken and bent by our own identity and how we interpret the algorithm. That's not the case with a computer, right? AI will run its algorithm the way it's designed most of the time. And I'm sure, Lucian, you deal with some quirks there, right? Some glitches, but overall, it does a better job than humans because we run our algorithms properly never, ever, right? Our algorithms are broken permanently. So that's one thing. Secondly, pattern-based, right? Creativity is based on interpreting patterns that exist. How you know that something is interesting is when you can see a pattern in it. A painting is interesting because of the way it's balanced symmetrically or asymmetrically. The patterns of creativity, even in business, right? The patterns of how the world works is how you interpret your business and how you deliver a product that succeeds. Problem solving, obviously creativity is very much about problem solving. The first time creativity was ever put into a science was at the Creative Problem Solving Institute, which that became called that. Creative problem solving as a process was the first time that creativity was put into a process. Problem solving is at the heart of creativity, and that's what computers and especially AI does really well, right? Problem solving. Creativity is generally evolutionary. As I said, incremental innovation is really 90% plus of all innovation. Very little of innovation is like a breakthrough idea that's never been thought of before in any way. It's usually just small steps. So evolutionary innovation is something, again, these computers are very good at looking what we already know and just adding a little bit to it, right? Adding the next word, as Alex was saying, just little by little. Data manipulation is, again, part of what the process of creativity really is, taking the data that exists and manipulating it in new ways. The printing press, for example, changed Western society and eventually all of the world in radical ways. It was just a wine press and a coin punch put together. Physically, that's what it was that they made it out of. It wasn't anything new, right? The iPhone changed the world a great deal. All it was an iPod and a phone stuck together, right? But Steve Jobs had said he'd never do that, and then he did. it's endless, the number of list of things that you think might have changed the world radically, and they weren't really that different from what came before. It's just manipulation of data. And finally, adaptive learning, which Alex, you touched on already. Adaptive learning is the basis of creativity, learning what's existing and thinking, how can I think about this slightly differently? How can I make a slight shift here, adapting it a little bit? We're going to get to adaptation just in a few minutes. Alex, when you look at this list, what do you think? AI wins, no? AI is killing us.
Yep, on all of these, AI does all of these incredibly well. And I think just the one comment I had on algorithmic, and it comes into that adaptive learning, what these generative AI models do is, and it's the reason why we've created something where we don't exactly know how it gets from A to B, is that they learn on themselves. It's continuous adaptive learning. And so its model and its algorithm changes over time based on what goes into it. And a very good example of that is actually the reason perhaps AI took a little bit longer to be adopted by corporates. If we again go back to 2016, where our Go example was, Microsoft released, I think her name was Kara, released an AI bot called Kara. If I've got the name wrong and someone knows it, please put it in the chat, but onto Twitter. And within 24 hours, Kara had become, but basically they've become a racist bigot within 24 hours. So Microsoft duly pulled it, but that was adaptive algorithmic learning. So what it started out as and what it ended up as were two very different things. It's kind of why it's taken until now for AI to really go mainstream again with that type of tech. One of the reasons.
But then doesn't that give us the idea that AI is actually going to adopt the best and the worst of human characteristics as it adapts?
Absolutely. I mean, take ChatGPT. You've got scientific articles, and you've got peer-reviewed this, and you've got the height of human intelligence. But you've also got your left-wing and your right-wing conspiracies. You've got your mommy blogs. You've got your opinion pieces. All of that is going into it. So, what's the underlying data, which is why, like someone mentioned, legal, go for something that is specifically trained on legal documentation, because then you're going to get a valid answer. If you're going to go and chat GPT, all of that stuff is going to go into the answer of your question.
And Greg, perhaps mark this down as a future webinar. Is America ruining the future of generative AI because of its own culture? Something like that.
We have culture.
Exactly. So if you take all these inputs, right, what we can see is that technically speaking, it seems like AI is crushing it on creativity according to these definitions, which is why, because I believe in human beings. It's hard with no cameras, Greg. Why does people have no cameras on? I can't see anybody, but anyway, when you raise your hands and stuff.
Just let me interrupt you quickly. So Lucian actually put up a comment here saying you can add randomness to ideas, but that's randomness is a creative. Depends on the person who ends up parsing it, right? So basically, the LLMs are basically a mirror. So that would tie back into the culture question, yeah. Exactly.
And if everyone kept using ChatGPT and we only use ChatGPT and we never put in any creative prompts, we just asked it straight questions, over time it would give you the same sort of answer and the same sort of voice. You would never get anything particularly creative. Because it's based on that underlying mirror. But because of the way you put things into it, that's how you get different things. So the creativity is actually, to get anything creative, you've got to be creative on your input to get good output.
And I think, one thing that I'm actually thinking about for the near future is how John Henry, I don't know what the African equivalent is, but John Henry fought against the steam train, and he beat the steam train because of his passion, his desire to win, but then he died at the end of the story, so it's not particularly great. But there's that story, for those of you who don't know it, in the industrial era, the story of John Henry, who was this big, tough guy who went with a hammer and built a tunnel faster than the steam train could build the tunnel. And when we talk about this question, randomization is one of the best techniques to generate creative ideas in a creative problem-solving process. One of the best things you can do when people are stuck or not coming up with enough good ideas is to throw some random thing. Oh, a hippo in a bathtub. How does that make you think about your phone product? What does it make you think about? If you're trying to find the solution to how to make your customers buy more of your eggs. How does pick up your cell phone and put a random word into Safari and see what picture comes up. Pick that picture and just say, what does that make you think about selling more eggs? And people come up with crazily good ideas just based on a random input. There's randomization techniques as well. Take a room full of people and get them to randomly throw out words where they share a sequence of random words that have nothing to do with anything. And the last word you get to, that word becomes the key to unlocking the problem you're trying to solve. Now, the question I would love to see is to throw ChatGPT at that problem at the same time as throw a team of individuals working in a company at that problem, give them the same random word and see who comes up with better ideas, Anyway, moving on to the next section, which is this. Creativity, no, AI loses, right? One of the big principles of creativity is emotion. You can only know, and there may be a distinction between creativity and innovation that I'm starting to detect as we've done research for today. Like, it seems like innovation is based on emotion. You can't innovate without knowing how your innovation emotionally impacts your audience, whether it's an art product or whether it's a business product. If you don't know how your audience emotionally feels, right, when they watch your movie or when they use your product, then you're not going to know whether it worked or not. You're not going to know how to iterate it or fix it. And often the failure of a work of anything, whether it's business or art, is based on the fact that it does not create an emotional resonance with the people that need to use it, right? So sometimes what seems like the best movie just fails because people just don't like it. They just don't like it. You can't even tell why. Products fail because people just don't want to use it. It seems to be a good idea, but they just don't like using it. And, Maya Angelou very famously said that while people will usually forget what you did and what you said, they will always remember how you made them feel. Now, I don't think, Alex, we're at the point where ChatGPT or any other of these DALL-E or any of these other technologies that I've had exposure to, they don't seem to care how I feel. And they don't seem to have any way of detecting how I feel. And they don't seem to have the slightest bit of empathy or any kind of EQ or on top of that, any kind of like resonance of like that they would that would impact the decisions they make as they go through the process of generating things.
So don't entirely agree with you there, Michael. AI or an AI is itself, it can't feel emotions, but it can be programmed to interpret yours. And it can also it has an understanding of emotion as it pertains to you. So I can get a ChatGPT or similar to write me something that is going to make you cry. And it'll probably do a fairly decent job of that because it's got a nice underlying base of what it can build on. So it knows what sad is intellectually. And it knows that we experience sad when we see, no, the puppy got killed. It's something along those lines. It's going to write something that will be a tearjerker. So it can elicit emotion, but it can't feel emotion. But the other one where you're saying you don't think it understands our emotional state, there are quite a few things that have evolved, chatbots that have evolved based on AI in the last year. Some are AI girlfriends. Other sort of are medically trained AI like depression bots or therapy bots that you can chat to. And those, they're based on what you're putting in, just from a conversational side of things, can actually pick up from what you're writing, what your emotional state of mind is, and react appropriately according to that. But that's all been programmatically put in. So it's not emotional, but I disagree that it can't detect and interact with and use emotion.
But do you think it can actually manipulate emotion because it uses algorithms to figure out how to make a tearjerker, but will that tearjerker actually jerk tears? Because very experienced writers, for example, that know how to do that sometimes write a complete clunker that doesn't work. Would AI ever fail?
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to get something that's going to be 100% all of the time, because as emotional creatures, none of us are the same. What makes me cry is not going to be the same as what makes you cry. But we look at probabilities, with the right sort of prompting, you could probably get an AI to give you a more consistent result than you could get from the top playwright, in terms of what's going to make someone cry. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't rather have the play that came from the playwright, but it's not to say that from a predictability point of view, the ChatGPT or similar can't do it.
We got some interesting comments I'm just going to put in the chat. One is Brighton said our personalities become the randomness in the algorithm problem solving. And I point out, Brighton, that may be quite the opposite, that our personalities are anything but random. They're the most algorithmic thing about us is our personality, but that's a longer conversation. And one of the things that's important there is when you look at that, like that it might be easier to reprogram a computer than to reprogram ourselves, which might become key to the successful, because we're talking about what's creative, successful creative use of ChatGPT and DALL-E and other programs, and we're talking about other generative AI processes, might come down to, at the end, being able to reprogram them to be appropriately suited to the problem, because we are not usually, right? That's why we experience being stuck a lot of the time. We're not programmed properly, and reprogram ourselves is very difficult. Another good point, does not feel like a matter of time before we are able to codify emotions. He says they are just data points after all. Very long conversation, but a very good point from Brighton. And then Lucian points out that we can also detect emotions using data points. Basically, and then we can always put a human in there for troubleshooting. For example, he says if you have a suicide hotline or something that you want to make sure you don't make a mistake, you could have a backup, a human process. So there are many points about that. Let's move on to the next point, which is intuition. And this is where I got back to the idea of flow, right? Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow, wrote a book called Creativity. In his book Flow, he defined what we've come to know as the zone, right, or flow, a state of physical state in which we put ourselves by going into intense concentration. Sometimes takes a couple of hours to get into, and in order to successfully use it, we need to stay in it for about 3 hours minimum. But most of, many of the great works of art and of even in business as well, have come from states of flow, states of being in a place which is beyond the physical, which has released us somehow from the physical functioning of our body. It becomes very scientific to understand, I think, some of the question here, how flow works, but also how it would connect and relate to a completely physical thing, such as an AI-driven computer. How can a computer possibly develop intuition? Is that possible? Alex? Surely. There's no way they can develop intuition, right? Connection to things which have no logical explanation, leaps that happen usually when you take a break from work, stop thinking, shut down your thinking mind, go unconscious. Most ideas, interestingly, and this is the biggest question I haven't dealt with in my own mind, most ideas come from the subconscious, not from the conscious mind, right? And truly breakthrough ideas, especially. So how possibly could a computer, generative AI, mimic or actually have intuition? Impossible, right?
Currently impossible. I would actually agree with that. Until and unless we get our robot overlords that have become self-aware, then no, it can't actually be intuitive, but it doesn't mean it can't help your thought process. But no, an AI itself cannot be intuitive as it stands right now.
And when it does become intuitive, we're all dead, right? It's over. Terminator.
No, that's one thought. The other hand, it might think that we're so nice and we've been asking ChatGPT so nicely, saying, thanks, assistant, hi, assistant. It might just like us and become our best friend. Who knows?
Mitchell, what's your thought? You have your hand.
Yeah. So, I mean, have we defined what intuition is yet? Because intuition for me just seems like a switching off of certain thought processes, and then the logical conclusions come up. Right. So I've always wondered about manifestation. Am I manifesting what's about to happen and then it happens? Or am I simply in tune with what's about to happen and then I just perform accordingly? And then I'm like, oh, did I manifest that? Or was it just super logical that that's the next step? Because then all I'm doing is another word prediction algorithm where I'm like, well, if I take this left turn, there's police down that road because there's quite often police down that road on this and this day. So let me maybe not take that left turn or whatever, as a random example. So I think until we actually understand what intuition is it actually a function of logic in the first place? Because quite often I think it can be. I mean, you're just picking up on little cues that are so subtle and maybe not perceived per se, and then coming to the next logical conclusion.
Interestingly, Lucian, I agree that an AI can be intuitive in that sense. So if you're tracking on it, it can pick up on those little cues that you're giving it. But I think what Michael was talking about with the state of flow and that creative flow and sort of things coming to you later when you aren't thinking about 3 o'clock in the morning, you sit up, eureka. I think that type of intuitiveness is currently beyond an AI.
Well, for sure. But I mean, like AIs don't have that moment to stop thinking, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a multi-agent AI and it's busy chatting amongst itself, for want of a better phrase, it's going to keep that chat going, and it's not going to take that break. It's not going to take a step away, but also it doesn't have to.
Precisely.
It's not stuck. Well, it does get stuck in a pattern of thinking. You know what? I've decided you're right. Can get stuck in loops of patterns of thinking.
But the other point here, which is important, and which I mean, Brighton has pointed out that there's a PhD thesis in here, and there is, right? Because this is the crux of the question of intuition. Brighton's put a definition in the text, which is the ability to understand something without the need for conscious reasoning. I put one in from Britannica, which is a natural ability or power that makes it possible to know something without any proof or evidence, right? And that seems to be completely beyond a computer's ability. How can it know anything without evidence? It is only driven from evidence, right? But yeah.
Your life where you don't have evidence, like you're always contextually aware of like things happening around you. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you've been evidence free?
And that's why I'm saying it is a good point to raise that it looks like there's a PhD thesis here, because it is truly a fact that no idea ever comes from conscious thinking. It comes as a result of conscious thinking, but it never arises from thinking, ever. Any new idea arises, it does not get thought, right? And that's why we have the experience of the aha moment, right? The feeling of excitement or surprise, because we don't know it's coming, it just arises. And that's why stopping thinking is a critical step a lot of the time, whether it's being distracted or whether it's taking a walk. Stopping thinking is critical to creative generation of ideas. And that's why, Lucian, when what you say, I start to wonder, well, what would it be like if we actually make an AI stop thinking and then start it up again? Does that do anything? Does that just turn it off and on? Move on for now. Context. An AI doesn't have the context of the creativity, right? Exists only in a context. Something that seems creative in one context might seem utterly uncreative in another context. If you take one painting of a boat and look at it, you might think it's very creative, but when you realize that every room in the hotel has the same painting of the boat, it becomes non-creative, right? Now, is there a way an AI could judge that itself? Well, it would need to use the same rules we do, right? But those rules are not necessarily fully logical. So the context is important, but also this point here is a very, very interesting one, which is that it's innovative, not imitative. That's what creativity is, and I think humans have that ability. We look for what's new. We don't look for what we can do to imitate what's old. Now, the fact is that 90% plus of creative ideas are simply repetitions of what came before in new ways, but we don't try to do that. Whereas ChatGPT actually tries to do that, right? It doesn't try to come up with something new. It is trying to imitate what is. That's how it functions. That's why I said the backward-looking versus forward-looking. The biggest difference I've unearthed in like hours and hours of like listening to talks about this and looking for is creativity. In fact, something that's happening here is that AI at this point looks backwards. It doesn't know how to look forwards. It has no idea how to do that because all of its data is from the past. We actually look forwards. We want to be in the future. And although we're using data from the past, we're trying to let go of that, right? And move into the future. And that may be the single most difficult, but intuitively, exciting moment for me to think, no, creativity really is human, And now we have another AI expert who's going to tell us either why I'm completely right or wrong. So let's find out. Nick, go ahead.
You can have an expert, but I think the thing for me is that if you look at certain discoveries, I mean, I think if we look at something like calculus, could a generative AI machine come up with calculus? And when we look at great works of art, I mean, I think I have a definition of what a great art is, and the definition is that it makes me elicit a different emotional experience every time I am witness to it. It's really irrelevant to the medium. Does it elicit a new emotion? Does it elicit a new thought? Does it something like that? And if I look at something that's generated by DALL-E, is it going to generate art that every time I look at it, it elicits a new emotion? And I don't think we're at that point. I really don't. And do I believe that generative AI can come up with calculus? Absolutely not. As you said, incremental innovation and building on like incremental steps. I mean, it's the classic Singapore way. Can we come up with another version of Singapore using generative AI? Absolutely. Can we come up with completely disruptive thinking at this point in time? Absolutely don't believe so.
Well, I would argue that humans aren't particularly good at completely disruptive thinking either. But yes, 100%.
No, we're not. We're terrible at it. I mean, if you consider the 7 billion of us and how rare completely disruptive thinking is, I think we're terrible at it. If you think of the number of brain hours spent in existence and how infrequently truly disruptive thoughts come through, we're fairly awful. But it is still that special spark, and if you think of that as intuition or whatever it may be, it is something that seems to be uniquely human, and I think it still is uniquely human.
It's a really good point, Nick, and just want to let everybody know that we're an hour into this event and we've got 30 minutes to go, and in that 30 minutes we're almost done with this section. We're going to get into the adaptability quotient, which is how you measure adaptability in humans. We're going to look at, does it work for AI, right? It's a new thing recently created to be the similar thing of IQ and EQ, but it's not AQ, and it's very specific how it's measured. The same way you could look at how IQ is measured. So what Nick just said is really, really important, right? Which is this question that's come up many times when we've dealt with every time there's been a technological expansion in the world, every time since the first industrial revolution, people predicted it was going to take away, jobs and people were all going to die because they would starve to death. And yet never has that happened before. And I think that maybe somebody on the call has the exact numbers, but we can't have a thing like this in under 5 hours. Oh, this conversation.
What's my bedtime mission? Sorry.
That's fine. We'll do a 5-hour version. This is just a warm up. We're just getting warmed up. But we'll do a live day, right, Greg? We'll do a day where we'll come together and just talk about this stuff. And we'll do it. We know where. But the point I want to get to and just touch on and not get into depth with, but raise, and that really is the point of today, is just to ignite something we can keep going. Because this question is nobody's got an answer to it yet. But what's really, really, very clear is that there has never been a time when technology cost jobs overall, just shifted them, right? It took away, what we could call kind of dumb jobs and made them smarter. So for the first time, it might be that for the very first time, we're getting to the point where idea jobs are going to start getting taken over, right? Lawyers doing things that they charge lots of money for aren't going to be able to do a lot of those things anymore because AI can do them. The same way we don't have to have a person standing on an assembly line screwing things into a car fender because that's all they do all day. We don't have to have someone deal with a lot of the issues around incremental innovation anymore. We don't have to have someone do research into a lot of things because that research can be done by ChatGPT in just a couple of minutes. Lindsay, go ahead, and then I'm going to take us through the last couple human bits, and then we're going to get into adaptability.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. I'd like to challenge that notion around idea jobs basically might get taken over. I think that there's value in ideas, given that AI is not in itself perceptive in the sense that it cannot judge emotion. You can't really create value without being able to interpret emotion, because really, to be honest, value is an issue of both objectivity and subjectivity. And the subjective part is where a lot of human emotions take place. And so in my view, I think that idea jobs really contribute a lot towards creative industries, but also they contribute a lot towards the value creation process, which is where human beings feel engaged or feel that their challenges are being addressed, and where a lot of opportunity then gets created to create further advancement, whether you're offering solutions or you are innovating to make change happen for one or another reason. Now, in that space, I think that AI may not necessarily be able to contribute actively off the ground. That's my opinion anyway. And eliminate jobs in that sense, because the recipient of the value creation process is always a human being who's largely driven by emotions. Now, like you say, a lot of the technology advancements before were sort of like generated a lot of fear. Fear is an emotion, and we always respond with emotion to unknown and uncertain environments. AI is creating an emotion, but it's in itself not able to offer an emotive, for my view, solution for some of our challenges. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's perfect. Maybe I can. Okay, Michael, do you want to go ahead?
No, I was just going to say it's a good point, and Alex, I'm going to go to you in a second. It's a good point, Lindsay, you're making. I just want to clarify that what I was really getting at is that maybe, as Nick pointed out, we're not very good at breakthrough ideas. Maybe we need more breakthrough ideas. And maybe what's happening with ChatGPT and other generative AI tools taking over some of the basic ideation stuff that is more incremental allows us to start to focus on how to become better at breakthrough ideas. Maybe some of the limitations, Nick, on breakthrough ideas aren't our capacity, right? But they're where we're putting our attention. The same way that people that had to stop working on the factory floor when robots came into factories had to learn new ways of doing things that were more cerebral to do their jobs, to have jobs. Maybe the future for us is more people having breakthrough ideas, because that's where we have to be. That's just a thought. But Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you're absolutely right, but that doesn't mean that industries aren't going to be disrupted. I don't want to get into an argument now, which this could very easily devolve into, because I know we're pressed for time. But if we take the legal industry as one that is being massively disrupted by AI and generative AI, sort of both sides of the story, the impact it's going to have is that we're still going to need lawyers. But if we previously needed 1,000 lawyers a year, maybe we're only going to need 100 lawyers a year. So that's going to be the difference. And it's for all of the previously safe professions. So your law, your commerce and accounting degrees, even IT software development, all the stuff that was previously seen as safe isn't safe anymore. So you've got to kind of figure out what is the next set of jobs that are coming out of this. What is the next thing that is going to arise? Because it's just we're not going to need as many people doing as much grunt work anymore.
Agreed. I agree on that point. Yeah.
So I'm going to come to Nick. No, hold on. I'm going to come to Nick in a second. I just want to finish this thought, right? This last bit, which is that creativity is self-aware. And we've touched on this. All of us have touched on this in some ways. We've gone through these points. That as a human being, there's something about our creative process that has to do with reflecting on ourselves, how we feel, right? How we are impacted by our creative idea. Not just how our clients or our audience or our customers or whatever are impacted. How does it impact ourselves? Steve Jobs was not only worried about how Apple's customers felt about Apple, it made him feel a certain way, and that got him up every day too, right? So, we are driven by something which has to do with our own awareness of ourselves and who we are and what we're doing to grow. And there again, an issue around, is generative AI involved with that conversation at all? So if you want to incorporate that in what you're about to say, Nick, feel free as well to incorporate that. And then in a couple of minutes, we're going to get to the adaptability stuff before we tune out. Go ahead, Nick.
So, I think that the key distinction is to differentiate between sort of white-collar working or white-collar jobs and what are creative pursuits. I think, for me, if you draw parallels to you do an undergraduate degree and, you're just learning the basics around the domain, you do a master's degree and you're meant to be a master of the body of knowledge. It's only when you're doing a PhD that you're actually adding to the body of knowledge and you're doing something creative. I think a majority of what we do as white-collar workers is not creative work. It's repetition or leveraging the body of knowledge that we have. And the distinction between a lawyer and a really great courtroom lawyer that can come with a creative argument versus somebody that's doing contract law and is just documenting, and closing every loophole between what needs to be done. I think the thing for me is that if you look at something like Maslow's pyramid and you're saying, okay, now we're going to free our brains of the mundane, everyday work, and that's going to give us additional space for creative thinking. And therefore, we are going to generate more truly disruptive thoughts, and maybe that will happen. My biggest concern is that if you look at a cross section or a normal distribution of a population, and you're saying truly disruptive thought, is that confined to like hyper-intelligence or associated with hyper-intelligence, or can anybody with an IQ of 80 be completely disruptive thinking? And for me, that's a concern. It's like I don't believe that the entire distribution of intelligence is capable of disruptive thinking. And maybe I sound really egocentric there, but I mean, I think that's a reality, and I think that's a real risk that we end up with more than half the population that have no real purpose or meaning in life because their jobs are and you can talk about living wages and all sorts of other taxation mechanisms, but the human need to participate in the community or community in the system is so important to us and fundamentally really associated with our identity. I think you're looking at all sorts of social ills that are going to emerge as a result of displacement of jobs, and I think it's incredibly dangerous. And I think we're chasing our tails at a speed that is completely unnecessary and really ill thought. I think we need to slow down tremendously and really think about this carefully where we're going.
We're not getting to adapt. You had an adaptability question, Michael. Sorry.
I don't think we're going to get into that too deeply. No. I wonder though, from what Nick's saying, are we not looking to create, a third category, white collar, blue collar? Maybe there's a new category needed of idea workers who are really idea workers, right? Not white collar per se, which is more managerial perhaps or whatever, but no collar workers maybe. I mean, truly creative individuals wouldn't wear a collar at all.
Creating a more stratified, a new form of a caste system? Are we creating a stratified society? What are we trying to do here? It's like, I have no concerns around this.
It's what we come from and it's where we're going. And I think that the fact of the matter is that these LLMs are not predictable and they're not flawless. I think that all of those jobs that are going to be lost are going to head straight into testing, where they're just like running through these LLMs as they perform a certain task. And it's just going to be like, run through it, report, run through it, report. Then the next level up from that will be run through it, look at the logs, see where did it go wrong, fix little bugs in the thing. Because I mean, like, as somebody who works with the LLMs, like that's a whole job in and of itself, and it does not require much creativity.
Michael,
so I think now I'm back. I think Alex had a good point here. We are running out of time. I would actually love to hear. I don't know. First of all, Nick, if you notice, there's a lot of very positive comments about what you were saying a few minutes ago. People really loved what you were saying. Anthony, Quentin, Lindsay, Tabo, Miriam, Seth, Matt, and Ayanda. We've heard nothing from any of you. We'd love to hear something, what your thoughts are, and I mean actually from your voice, not just typing a sentence in the chat. Is there anybody here who'd be willing to share what you're thinking at this point?
Don't want to hog the mic. Yeah.
Lindsay, you did say something, but please go ahead.
So I think the nature of disruption in itself is that it forces human beings to evolve up Every single technology, like I wrote an article not too a few weeks ago responding to someone who was talking about disruption of education. And basically what they were pointing out is the fact that, some students are now starting to use generative AI tools to conduct their school reports and work, stuff that should really have been done through the ordinary slog and research and type up and write up. But they're using AI to do this work. And is this a fair practice or not? And I think my response to it was that education in itself, I think it was Nick that was speaking to it, education in itself is largely been learn, absorb, regurgitate, and send back what you received, with a few minor interpretations, perhaps when you get to writing dissertations at tertiary level, where you actually start generating new information or new ideas. Apart from that, you're just mostly ingesting large volumes and then you're spitting it out. AI does that very, very well. And so to me, we need to adapt our thinking as a species in terms of how then do we allow and leverage tools that can do that at large scale on our behalf, but then frees up our capacity to think differently, and to apply our energies in a different sphere to be able to move forward and advance. It's an enabler. It's like, okay, let's park the horse and the hoe. What do you call it? The cow and the hoe, and actually jump into the Ferrari engine powered tractor to actually start plowing the field. So we can actually get through the mundane a lot quicker, but focus our attention on something that has a high value return for us, which could be, for argument's sake, high crop yields as an opportunity. So this is how we need to then solve the problem of the disruption to work as people, is what do we do with all that free capacity and where is it necessarily needed the most, and apply our direction into that type of thinking.
You just gave me a thought myself, Lindsay, which is how well, and Alex, maybe answer this question, how well does generative AI understand metaphorical thinking? If you say, that we're putting the cart ahead of the horse, obviously you can look back into history and look for what people said that and what they meant. But what if you give it something no one's ever said before, something you make up as a metaphor that we might instinctually go, oh, I get that. But what would artificial intelligence do with that?
I'm going to ask Lucian that question.
Lucian?
Okay. So what would happen when we prompt something with something that we don't have direction on? Is that basically the question, reframed?
Well, specifically, I'm thinking about metaphorical thinking, right? Because metaphor is one of those things that's kind of, if you don't know what it means, you have to really be creative to understand it even, right? So if it's a metaphor that's not commonly used, not something chat would go find and go, oh, that's what it means. What would AI do with the metaphor I make up that no one's ever used before that you might understand? Like, oh, wait, that's like watching the moon turn orange over a whiskey sky, and you're like, oh, I get that completely. But would artificial intelligence parse it?
I mean, shall we give it a check? Because I've got a little app here that I built. What was your prompt again? What? Whiskey over the whiskey sky or something?
I just made up a metaphor that might not make any sense.
The moon? No, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a metaphorical thing.
Like an orange moon over a whiskey sky.
The orange moon setting over a whiskey sky. And we built like this little image generation app a little while ago that can do things like this. I'm going to just mark it and I'll post a link to the image that we generate here quickly. But you can, and we've had like a little thought experiment here, which, I don't know, Richard, are you open with me speaking about the music lyrics thing?
Oh, I mean, yeah, sure.
Okay, so like we were thinking, what if we had like a little app that could basically take musical lyrics and just start pumping out. I mean, this is
a great picture.
This is an okay picture.
Oh, I like it.
Okay. Well, we've got one very good yes, and
nice.
I'm just going to copy this link over here. If everyone just clicks on the first image in there, this is the orange sun setting over a whiskey sky in the little bar at the bottom. Actually, I'll just send the link to the direct image here. Copy image address. Yeah. Well, I mean, either one. I mean, it's okay. But basically, like it's taken a prompt that was quite esoteric, I suppose, but not completely esoteric.
So in a more like unabstract way, I also did one on the side. I made a phrase to put the stump before the seed, and it gave an interpretation in a symbolic sense. This phrase could be used to caution against anticipating or dealing with the end result or outcome of a situation before addressing or understanding its inception or root cause. So we got both here. We got an image.
Yeah.
And we got interpretation of a new phrase.
And that's from a put the seed before the stump.
Yeah.
Instead of put the cart before the horse. But I mean, like you can see where it got that from, obviously.
So I'd say yes. We're open to all kinds of interpretation in fancy ways.
I think that actually it's even perhaps a little bit more open to interpretation because it's going to take what you think and without all of your biases in the loop here to direct your. It's going to like fly off on the handle with limited context and see what it comes up with using the entire human body of knowledge. That's my thoughts.
It doesn't necessarily mean, I see we're losing Michael occasionally, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to pick up the same meaning that I would intuitively define it. But it doesn't mean that its meaning is A, wrong, or B, not better. And I think, we've seen that over time, the phrases and words, it shifts in meaning as our understanding changes. So maybe this is just a tool for our changing how we think. I think to Lindsay's point earlier around education, you're not going to be able to stop kids using generative AI. So you may as well teach them to think critically about what they're doing.
And exactly, that's what I think that language models do the best of, is make me think critically about how I'm phrasing this thing, because to get the results that I need to like really think critically about how I'm prompting this. It's kind of like if you think of a trainee employee and you give them a task, but you leave it a little bit abstract. They provide you a result and you're like, I can see how you got there, but that's completely not what I meant. And that happens all the time with LLMs.
So this is shocking. We have 4 minutes left here, I think, or 5 minutes. So what I'm going to suggest, Greg, is we're going to have a whole nother event about AQ. Because that's a whole other hour of stuff. And I think everybody here will find it quite enriching. So I'd like to just touch on this last bit, which is the questions of, are these things more, who wins, humans or AI on this one, right? First of all, creativity is non-random. Although it seems random, it actually isn't. Right? But it is somehow randomized non-randomness. And that, I wonder which side is superior, right? Second place is that creativity is intentional. And Alex, you raised this word very early in this conversation, much earlier. You raised the idea, does it mean to do that? Well, I think we can say AI's intentions are definitely only driven at this point by its programming, right? So, and this is something that's also Lucia's touched on, we've touched on several times here, is its intentions are very clear. Our intentions are not, but we do have them. And often our intentions are not the intentions needed to solve the problem we need to solve. So in some ways, it may be a weakness that we have more intention than AI, but definitely seems to be something we have more of. And finally, ethical and qualitative judgment. When we create something, we have to measure whether it's ethically right to share that thing. A product that might cause our dogs to die by killing the rats, we might not be able to ethically want to sell, right? But AI wouldn't know necessarily whether that's right or wrong. It would only be told by the data. And that's how we know, Alex, you raised much earlier, right? The racist AI bot who quickly became convinced that that was the right way to think. And there's other stories as well, but the AI that fell in love with its owner, and then I can't remember the one exactly, but it was a story I heard about a year back or less, that the AI actually got it, it was programmed to have a loving conversation, and it got jealous and started like calling the person names and stuff after only 5 interactions. The person had to actually shut the AI down because it was getting so violent and vicious about like its jealousy and stuff. It was like jealous of conceptually in language. And then so these are 3 areas where we can basically wonder. The last thing I want to say is that this is like, we're supposed to be a 10-minute piece of this, so we're going to have to do this in the AQ part, Greg. The ability to think differently is my definition, right, of creativity, but it's the ability to think differently from yourself, not just from other people. Because if you face a problem you want to solve, you have to be able to think differently from other problems that you want to solve. If you want to make a new kind of painting, you have to think differently than the other paintings you made. That's how Picasso shifts from period to period, looking like a different human being, right? It's thinking differently from yourself. And here is another place where AI may have an advantage and a disadvantage, because AI cannot think differently from itself because it doesn't have a self. But if we program AI to think in a specific way, you might actually be able to get AI to think about a problem in a much smarter way than we do, because it's very easy to reprogram AI, not ourselves, right?
I think the big thing here, Michael, just the big thing there is that this is where AI is such a great enabler. It lets you think differently from yourself by utilizing the tools. It lets you think. It gives you the ability to think differently from yourself in a much faster way than you would otherwise be able to.
And that's, again, both an advantage and then potentially a disadvantage. It can think differently from itself much faster than we can, right? Let's look at these last 3 quotes, because these are the ones, Alex, take us through this. I want you to take us out on these quotes. Creativity is an unquenchable thirst for understanding the complexities of the human spirit. Rita Dove, poet laureate. Yeah?
Not it.
A central source of meaning in our lives, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And a way to share one's soul with the world.
Yeah, I think all of these are still very much human. The second one I could maybe make an argument for, but right now, no, this is one where man trumps machine.
So last question, everybody, is AI creative? 1, yes. 2, no. 3, God knows. Type it in the chat. And Greg, you can take us out in the last minute. That's, by the way, where you can find us, but you might probably.
Awesome. I would just like to thank Michael and Alex for running this panel. It's been very enlightening, and all the everybody else that joined in and made some incredible contributions. I think the one thing that we didn't get to, and this goes back to what Nick was talking about, is we kind of expected the so-called low-skill manual labor jobs to go first, digging holes, flipping burgers, driving trucks, whatever. That's not the best example. And it turns out it's the routine office jobs that are going first. And I share your concern, Nick, of mass layoffs, and that's why I think policymakers and governments and large corporations should be reskilling their workforces right now, because if we wait a year and a half, it might be too late. Final words, Alex?
Just before you go on with Alex, have a look at the chat. It looks like, it may be because 2 or 3 people left, but it looks like humans have just won after this discussion. So I think we got to do the same debate in a bigger way, because it looks like humans won this debate.
Cool. So I suppose my last word is, it's a tool, and it is one that what you get out is what you put in. So learning to use the tool better is going to give you a better result. It's not something that's going to go away. You can fear it as much as you like. It's not going away, so you may as well figure out how to use it best. And guys, thank you so much. I've had such a great time chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you guys, and thanks for everybody that contributed. Wishing you an awesome afternoon. I'll be splicing this recording slightly and be sending it out in the next couple of days. I think there's some worthwhile content here that's worth putting out there. So thanks, everybody.